Hi, everybody. So we're going to talk about a love story. Everyone loves love stories. Nice fall day in New York City. So a little bit about me before we get into this. My name is Greg Avola. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Untappd. I live in New York City, but if you're not from New York City, I live in the suburbs. So I just say New York City, everyone knows where that is. I don't really live in the city per se. We'll move on for that. So as they said earlier, I used to be a senior software engineer at ABC News, also in the city. I primarily worked on the front end and back end. Funny story is their technology stack is Groovy. Has anyone used Groovy before? Yeah, exactly. So it was very interesting there. My role there was to really kind of modernize some of their stack, introduce them to things like AngularJS and things of that nature, which we'll talk about a little later. So I love three things outside of my child and my wife, but beer, data, and JavaScript, which is obviously why I'm here today talking about those things. And prior to Untappd, my claim to fame, if anybody ever watched the show Man vs. Food? So I was in an episode for like 5 seconds. My friend was doing a co-eating contest with the host, and I had to say a line like, "I'm not sure they're gonna finish it," or something like that. That was literally it. It took me 5 takes to do it. 5 takes, and I have the video. Maybe somebody wants to see it later. I'm not going to show it now, but it was pretty funny. My wife was also introduced into the video. It took her 1 take to do it, and she was cut from the actual episode. She was really, really pissed at me. So it is what it is. So I'm old school PhoneGap. So I've been using PhoneGap for almost 8 or 9 years, back when version 0.8. So I've been using this product for a very, very long time. I've seen it evolve from basic vanilla JavaScript to being more complex in every build script. I remember the early days we had to kind of compile everything together. The compile term was loosely used in that sense. So I've seen it progress, and it's really great to be able to talk about my experiences today with the platform, starting from the very beginning to where we are today. So before that, has anyone heard of Untappd before? Awesome. My mother will be very happy with that. So Untappd, for you who don't know, is a social network for beer drinkers. So it allows you to kind of share, check in, review, and also discover new beers all around you. So this is our application as of today. It's all written within Ionic. It's all written on PhoneGap platform, and it's available on Android and iOS. We are available on Windows Phone, but that's all I'm going to say about that. So basically, the concept here is that we want to create this enriched real-time experience with beer, be able to share it in more of a social atmosphere. I get a lot of people come to me and say, I love to share my beers on Facebook, but I'm tired of seeing pictures of babies, Christmas trees, and things I don't care about. So I market this product exactly that way. If you don't care about Christmas trees and babies on Facebook and you like beer, this is a product for you. So basically, we've used Ionic and Cordova together here to create this rich experience, all building off of our web technology background. So a little bit about the growth of where we are, just to give you a frame of context of why we feel that this platform is so important for building large-scale apps. A lot of people come to you and say, hey, you can't build an app that's web-based and have a lot of users. You can't build a base that has more real-time active check-in users. We have around 4.5 million users on the app today. Over 500 million check-ins we just crossed approximately a couple months ago. That's crazy. 500 million check-ins, 500 million beers consumed in 7 years. So that's pretty much a ridiculous number. But some people have a problem. I don't think so about that. So, 140 million photos have been uploaded onto Untappd. Just some check-in stats for September. About 16,000 beers per hour. Another problem, but I like that, 4.1 million photos have been added on a monthly basis. So photos was one of the reasons why we really got hooked into Cordova. And you'll see in the next slide here, we used to have a basic web app when we first launched. We didn't have any native integration whatsoever. So for us, I didn't think photos would that be a really important thing in the ecosystem of beer. I was ultimately wrong, 140 million photos. So it shows you how people like to be really attached to their beer and experience. So if you ever used Untappd in the very early days, this is what it looked like. We just saw the earlier photos of us. Look how beautiful that looks, right? Awesome. Then you have this piece of shit. I'm sorry for my French there, but this was 2010. We launched in October. September was the beta release. We're actually hitting 7 years, October 22nd, so it's pretty kind of cool to see that. We were an HTML5 web-based application only. And the reason we did that back in 2010 is that was really revolutionary. There wasn't many mobile web apps out there. Either you were within the store, you had a quasi-responsive app or website that kind of worked on all platforms, or you had neither. So we decided we wanted to focus on the web. We thought it was a cool way to get out to market faster. On that day one, we were on iOS, Android, WebOS. Who remembers WebOS? We were on WebOS and BlackBerry 6. Who remembers BlackBerry 6, you know? So we really wanted that for one reason. This is why I really believe the web is a great place to start your app today. You're able to use code across all platforms and get out to users fast. As you know, in this day and age when you're building apps, it's really important to be at the forefront of users' attention. We didn't want someone to say, oh, I love this Untappd app, but I don't have it on my phone. I'm an Android user. I'm a WebOS user. I'm a Windows Phone user. I can't use it. We didn't want that. There were other apps in the marketplace when we first started that were only on Android or iOS. We wanted to capture that market. That's why web is so important for us. So this was actually built with vanilla JavaScript and as jQuery. It's not a framework as our friend said over there, but it was wrapped together in the worst piece of code I've ever written in my entire life. But it worked, and it was easy to use, and we had social integration with Twitter and Facebook, so it was a great step, and we were really happy about it. We got a lot of users when we came out, people were using it. We ran into some problems. So the biggest problems that we ran into was app development. We had to build, it was great to be able to deploy code automatically to a website, have people immediately get it right away. That was fantastic. But it wasn't scalable in this type of architecture. If we moved from 2010, 2015, things started to appear. So the biggest problem that we came up with is that Untappd up to about 2 years ago with a part-time gig with my co-founder. I was the only technical side of that. So what are the biggest problems is I'm a web developer. I live in the front end and the back end, but I'm not a native developer. And I wanted to be able to build the same experience for Android, iOS, Windows Phone, etc., with one code base. And in 2010, 2011, there really wasn't many options to be able to do that, with the exception of PhoneGap. This is my favorite slide. I show this almost every single time that I do a talk, is that we talk to people all over the place about web apps. They really did not understand the concept back in 2010, and I'm sure they don't understand it today in 2017. The biggest problem is if you tell someone at a bar, hey, download Untappd, it's a really cool app for your phone. They're like, yeah, sure, open the App Store, and they search for it, and they can't find it. You're like, no, open up your Safari, your Chrome, and just type in untappd.com, and they've obviously lost you. They don't know what that is. We're getting better with that kind of perception, and the web is the biggest marketplace for your product, but at the same time, it just wasn't at that forefront right there. Code sharing is another big thing. Being a small company, being a small engineering group, we need to be able to share code across the board. We couldn't write a function that did one thing in Android that couldn't be shared across to iOS or a Windows Phone or etc. We need to be able to be efficient with our code base and be able to share it across the board, because without that, we really came into an issue of being able to progress code faster. We never wanted to be in a situation where we're deploying code to iOS and pushing a build to a store and then waiting 2 weeks to do the Android side. We really wanted to put them in the user's hands first. We treated everyone the same way, equal opportunity app download-ish thing. So we really wanted to make sure that we had all the code being shared across the board. Resources. Obviously, being a very small company itself, myself, and just one other person that wasn't technical, we couldn't hire someone to build an iOS native app or an Android app. And on top of that, once you get the initial app out there, you're going to have updates. You're going to want to be able to increment that. It wasn't feasible for us being a very small company, so we had to find other solutions for it. So Ionic, this lovely logo here, is the reason why I think we were able to kind of progress so much. We did have tons and tons of regular application development. We didn't use Ionic in the beginning. We basically had kind of a jQuery example. Our very first PhoneGap actually got rejected from the store. It's because we wrapped it in a web view and didn't do anything. That was back in the old days when they used to reject those apps at that time. Now they don't really care about those things. But our first real kind of Cordova experiment was actually using jQuery to pull raw HTML from our server and inject it into the DOM. That was also very bad for a lot of reasons. So we use the code that we used for our last version before Ionic came along was a very spaghetti-like, callback hell, everything. And we needed to be able to kind of start clean, be more concise with our code, and be able to kind of minimize and share it across the board. So Ionic came along, and we loved it. Number one, for many reasons, is open source. We are a big proponent of open source at Untappd. We try to put everything we possibly can, from libraries to things of that nature. The other thing, too, was cross-platform UI, UX. I look at Ionic really as a theming platform in a sense. There are some hooks and stuff like that for JavaScript, but for me as a developer, I'm not very good at designing things. I can make really cool interactions, I can make people check in beers, earn badges, and do all that fun stuff, but I'm not good at design. And Ionic has a bunch of controls built in already for you that are really easy to use and very simple without having to have too much complex design skills. Also, iOS, Android, and Windows Phone support out of the box. Very easy to use. It knows what device you're on, it changes the head tag and the HTML tag, and it immediately updates your UI. So there's no more, I'm going to move the Android navigation bar to the bottom or the top. I'm not going to change the layout of the checkboxes to be different. It's all done for you. It's really easy. And again, great for an HTML5, CSS3 hybrid solution. AngularJS was a great component of it. Real-time data binding between the two. I remember in the old days of jQuery, we used to have to check if the element equals what we thought it was after we changed it, which again was a lot of excess code we didn't have to really worry about. Again, it can be used on web, mobile, and native with Cordova, which is helpful for us for debugging. We can run it in our browser, which I'll actually show you in a little bit how that works. So that's really what Ionic is for me, and you can let me know if I'm wrong with all these things. So again, there are a lot of solutions out there. There are a lot of theming platforms. There are a lot of framework platforms. So why did we choose Ionic? Ultimately, there may be more stars now from this report, but almost 30,000 stars on GitHub right now. It's a thriving community. Developer-friendly documentation. If anyone works in the technology field and you look at documentation, like Facebook, for example, it's very difficult to follow sometimes. So there's tons of great docs on Ionic to help you kind of figure out anything you like. One of the cool things I like about Ionic is that there is actually a Slack channel. You guys can join and you can ask questions to other developers that are on there. That's really cool too, because sometimes Stack Overflow is only going to help you so far, and this can give you kind of real-time updates and stuff like that. One of the cool things too, if you're not a developer, is they have something called App Creator, which is really cool for just kind of prototyping some of the apps in a kind of a view. So you can see what it looks like, interactions. We use this on our team at some points to kind of do some prototyping for some of the app stuff that we're working on. And then ultimately Ionic Native, which is a wrapper for Cordova plugins. So we talked a lot about already TypeScript and callback structure. The traditional Cordova plugin structure is callback driven, but within TypeScript, you really want to use more promise-oriented things. So what Ionic does is native, it allows you to take your regular plugins you already use and write them in more TypeScript-oriented fashion, so it looks cleaner in your code. So that's really why we use Ionic. So a little bit of Ionic history here. So there is 3 versions currently at this time. The first version was built off AngularJS 1X, which is a little bit different, as you all know, than Angular 2. Ionic 2, released in September of 2016, supported TypeScript and also AngularJS 2, which was a complete rewrite from Angular 1. I felt really confident with Angular. When 1 came out, I understood everything. I was like, teaching it to people. And then Angular 2 came out, and I felt like I'm back at the bottom again. So that was a big migration for us from 1 to 2, and we'll talk about that later. Ionic 3, which is the most recent version, introduces a lot of cool things like lazy loading of your page elements, and we'll talk about why it's important for an app like Untappd, and also AngularJS 4X support. So Ionic 1 versus Ionic 2, again, like I mentioned, a total rewrite because Ionic 2 uses AngularJS 2, so you really can't use any of the kind of the components that you have written already in Ionic 1 together. TypeScript promises and observables instead of callbacks. There is traditional callbacks and promises in Ionic 1, but it's all promises and observables driven in Ionic 2. There's more component-driven stuff within Ionic 2. We use a lot of reusable code, which helps. In Ionic 1, we use a lot of directives to help those pieces there. One of the things we discovered with Angular 1 versus Angular 2 is that the filters that we used to use are gone, and they're replaced with something called pipes, which are custom to your application. So things like using date pickers and also filtering results on the page for formatting, all using pipes now as opposed to using filters. So that's Ionic 1 versus 2. And 2 versus 3, much more easier upgrade process, similar architecture. The AngularJS 4 support is awesome, so they can actually get a whole lot faster. Lazy loading components and pages was major for us. I remember talking with the Ionic folks about how our app was kind of slow when it first started. It's because we're loading all of our pages when they first start on Ionic 2. But with Ionic 3, we can lazy load those pages later until when they actually need to be used, help the speed up of the startup. For most of apps that are small, there may not be a huge benefit for you. But for us, we have almost 60 pages within our application, so we don't want to load 60 pages, including settings pages that they're never going to touch potentially right off the bat. That's why lazy loading is so important for us. So I'm going to show a little bit of demonstration on how to set up your own Ionic app and how we kind of use it, some of the plugin stuff. These are kind of the key things, the key terminologies that I've kind of come to knowledge when looking at Ionic. Obviously, Ionic is the main framework itself. The CLI is what you're going to use to kind of do things like serving the application, building it, being able to run it on a device. App scripts is the compiler code for Ionic, so it allows you to build and transpile things together. Also does code splitting, everything behind the scenes. As someone that's not that attuned to that process, having this app scripts be built in automatically allows you to just say, Ionic build Cordova or Ionic Cordova build, and it automatically will do it for you without even knowing what's going on. And Ionic native, again, we talked about that as being the wrapper of the actual project itself, to be able to put the plugins automatically into TypeScript so you can actually use them in an effective manner. So if you're interested in getting started here, it's very simple. Just run this command at the very top, just Ionic Cordova. You install the Cordova CLI and the Ionic package. You also want to do Ionic Start My Apps tab. What this will do is it will build an app automatically on your computer with the name My App, and it's the tabs kind of template. Ionic has a few different templates for you to use, such as a blank template just starts off with nothing, or a tabs one, and there's also one more, I believe it does a sidebar or a kind of hamburger navigation as well. I like tabs, I don't like hamburgers, so that's what it is. All right, so we'll do a little demonstration here. If I can pull this up and make this a lot bigger. So I've already run the command on my command line. Is that good? All right. So you'll see it builds a bunch of files on the left-hand side. And really what you're going to live into is the source directory. When I first started using Ionic, I was like, oh yeah, you just go into the www directory, because I'm used to Cordova, and go into this build directory, and whoa, what is this and this file? I don't know what any of this stuff is. So you don't want to go on www. That gets automatically generated for you when you run your stuff. So the way that Ionic structure is set up is that there's different pages, and these pages are corresponding to the pages in your app. So for example, there's an about one, there's a contact page, there's a home page, and there's a tabs architecture here. So let's look at, for example, the home page itself. So very simple, straightforward. You saw some of this already. Sorry, the color is a little weird there. So you have the header, all these web components here that make it really easy to reuse across your stack. Obviously written in AngularJS, you have things like the click process instead of things like this, which was the old way to do it, and stuff like that. So now you're using these more upfront things. So I want to run this on my actual browser itself. It's very straightforward to use. Let's just quit this and we'll load it the real way. All right, so all you need to do, let's just make it a little bigger here. Okay. So I'm already in my project here. I've already created my app itself. All they want to do is type in Ionic serve. And what that will do is it will compile all my JavaScript, my transpile everything, put it in Webpack. And when it's done, it will open up my browser automatically to the actual app that I'm working on. So, and here you go. And here it is. So all I have to do is just kind of inspect it a little bit, make it a little like a phone, and voila. There's your app. Very small, but you get the point. So basically, you have your app set up here. This is a starter kit. I didn't write any code, really. This is how it comes out of the box. So you have your tabs architecture. Everything is set up the way you want to. Notice how I said it automatically changes to Android and iOS based on what your device is. So I have it set to iPhone here. I'll switch, and here's the iPhone kind of look and feel. But if I switch back to Android, for example, and I refresh the browser, you get the Android look and feel with the buttons and everything else. So it's really cool, has a material design already built into it. It makes it look a lot awesome. So that's how you first start your Ionic app. Let's go back to this. So again, like I mentioned, you're using the Ionic CLI for doing most of the interactions. You want to you write your code together, use Ionic Serve, which will automatically create a browser or a web server inside of your box that will automatically update when you make changes, which is really nice because you can just automatically change things on the device and then type some changes and it will just save, automatically do it. Again, you can generate pages using Ionic CLI as well. There's tons of documentation as well on their website on how to do different things like creating different pages, because you may have noticed in some of the code structure here, say for example, you wanted to create a new page called Greg is awesome, because I am awesome, and you just use a page generator to actually do that, and it will create your own folder and files there. All right. So again, Ionic native, I want to touch on this, is really important. One of the biggest benefits to me as a Cordova developer and a PhoneGap developer is the plugin architecture. There are a lot of other platforms out there that do similar things to PhoneGap, but the community of you guys are why I like using the product as much. It's always a plugin to do something out there. I mean, there are millions and millions of plugins. So what Ionic native does is it allows you to take that wealth of plugins that are already out there and incorporate them in a more of an Ionic kind of TypeScript fashion. You don't want to use the callbacks or use window.plugins. Whatever in your code, which is kind of clunky. Ionic native will wrap that automatically for you, pass the variables back to the native code, and you can just code it the way you normally would. So there are over 200 native plugins available. There are more added every single day in the Thriving community. I've had the opportunity to kind of do a little debugging and fixing some that are already in there. So that's really cool to see some of the people that kind of commit to this. Literally every day, every release, I see Ionic native, there's a new plugin added or update. So it's really cool to do that. And it's the easiest way to really implement your code, your plugins within Ionic. Now, say for example, you have a plugin that you like to use. It's not part of the Ionic native platform. It doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means you have to kind of mix and match your code and do declarative statements such as declare, Cordova or things of that nature in the code, and then kind of write it in a non-kind of TypeScript fashion. So it's definitely available to do that, even if they're not part of Ionic native. So I want to give a quick demo of the native, and I testing it out earlier, and I couldn't get to work because I wasn't really paying attention. But basically, I wanted to show you the documentation for the Ionic native platform. Show you how it works. And the one I like the most is, I was going to demo, is this, Safari View Controller. Who has ever used a plugin from Eddie? He's the man. I have never met him. I've talked to him online a few times, but he's a godsend in the Cordova plugin community. So basically, he wrote this the plugin called Safari View Controller. Does anyone know what Safari View Controller is? So you know how you open up Twitter, for example, and it has that really weird experience where you open up a link and it has a browser inside of the app? That's typically known as an in-app browser, which is used probably a plugin like that before when you want web content inside of your Cordova app. Safari View Controller has a new experience of a nice clean browser that comes in. So it's not, you don't have to style it. It looks just like iOS. In iOS 10, it kept all the cookies and the login sessions from your stuff before. iOS 11 doesn't do that anymore, which kind of sucks. But this is a great plugin to use. All you would do is run these commands on the very top here, and then there's all the documentation is right here. I mean, what kind of site have you been to? The website it has everything right here. A full example. You just copy and paste, and you're done. So that's a great example of how good documentation is for Ionic when it comes to these type of things here. So you would easily add this into your code itself. You could run it on your phone. When you tap on a link to open up the Ionic IO website, and it would load a native component automatically for you. So this is kind of a way you look at it. Now, if you're curious on how it looks without Ionic native, maybe like you're curious how it works, it's pretty much the same exact thing. This is the code right here. So instead of using this more like function-based stuff that you see more of the success in the callback structure, everything's written in a more TypeScript-oriented way with Ionic Native. There is no such thing as an Ionic Native plugin. That doesn't exist. It's just a wrapper around existing plugins that already exist in the system. All right. So a little bit about the plugins we use. If you're curious, we use a lot of plugins because our app is ginormous. I'm trying to get it down, but long story. So we use a camera, geolocation, device notification, and file transfer, which we will be removing because it's depreciated to more web-based systems. We use Branch.io for our deep linking within our application, also a plugin as well. So for our view controller, like I mentioned, this is my favorite plugin. Has anyone used this plugin before? Ionic Keyboard? If you haven't, I don't know how you're still here because I'd be killing myself with the keyboard functionality issues you have within a Cordova app. This pretty much solves everything. Every problem that you ever had with Cordova and keyboards popping up, closing down, going left or right, whatever you want to do. It's an amazing plugin. Barcode scanner is a great thing because we actually can scan the barcode on the beer and automatically read it and check you in. We use the Facebook login because we're a social app and you have to offer Facebook login. The best part about any social app, I guess. And 3D Touch. I mean, doesn't get used very often, but there's a plugin for that. So it's really amazing how much is out there. Also written by Eddie, so what else is new? So, all right, so a couple of lessons we learned with Ionic as I wrap up here. Anytime you build a Cordova app and things of that nature, you have to be conscious about the DOM and the CSS that you're working on. So things like box shadow, as you probably have heard for many years, will slow down scrolling speeds and things of that nature. So if you minimize the DOM effort with what you're working on, you're going to get much better performance with scrolling, animations, things like that. Speaking of animations, for our standard, we have to support all the way back from 4.4 and higher, which does have the enhanced Chrome view enabled. However, for us, we found that the standard performance on transitions weren't as great as they were on iOS, so we actually have disabled them for our application for Android users. So just be conscious about the types of apps that you're building and whether that's important to you. Lazy loading effectively is very, very important. You might think for yourself, you know what, lazy load every single page, what's so odd? Just the start page. I only need the start page to be not lazy loaded, and everything else to be lazy loaded. That may seem like the right thought in your head, but it did not work for us because of the fact that we're loading multiple pages at once. So say, for example, someone launches our app, and they're on the home screen, which is the activity page, and they tap over quickly to the discover page, which is a search. That's a half a second loading time of that next page. So we actually loaded all the pages on the tabs to start, so they're easily switchable, but then the detailed pages are the ones we lazy load. That way we have faster speeds and faster times. For us, I would much rather have used observables instead of promises for HTTP, only because when you're talking about apps that go from page to page, sometimes you load on a page itself and you go to the next one, and the first one hasn't finished yet. And you cannot cancel a promise at this point. So sometimes it becomes a really problematic for us. A lot of HTTP requests in low networking situations, we want to be able to cancel the existing promise so we don't have to continually bundle up and send requests when it doesn't need to. So it's something that we wanted to change, but we were so deep into promises at that point, it was hard for us to do that. And again, 4.4 is the crux of my existence. Even with WebView, Android does not support 4.4 anymore from updates from the Chrome view perspective. So they're not receiving updates for the latest version of the Chrome view in there already. So what we have added to use Crosswalk to actually give them a little bit of a boost for 4.4 devices. So we actually have two APKs that go to the store, one for Chrome view for this device here, for API 19 and lower. Anything higher than that, we'll use the regular Chrome view because they get updates for it. So there are people that still use this platform. I thought I could just say, whatever, throw them away. They're the most angry people that I know at this point in my life.
They're being forced to use Android 4.4.
Yeah, exactly. And the best thing is that when I tell them that their phone's like 4 years old, they're like, no, it's not. I'm like, okay, whatever. So ending out today, I always talk about stats. Untappd is all about beer, and I love analytics. I love to show a little bit about what we can do from our analytics perspective. So I took this stat back in June of this year. This shows check-ins per hour in the New York City area. Everyone says New York City that can't sleep, doesn't sleep. You would expect this to be all over the place. But the biggest drinking hours are really on 7 p.m. and 8 p.m., pretty much the same time in a given week perspective. So that's kind of interesting to think. I would think it'd be a little later in New York City. It's a huge drop-off after 9 to 10 to 11, although you can probably argue that people are a little bit too far in to even remember what their phone is, so then maybe they just forgot to check in. So I thought, how does this compare globally perspective? look at globally, looking at PST time zones as that, excuse me, a much different story. We're talking about 4 to 5, which translated over in New York is around 7 to 8. So we're in the right area in terms of people checking in at that time period. The crazy thing is like what's happening here. That's what I really want to know. 1 a.m. to 4 a.m. I don't know what's going on. A lot of beer drinkers out there, that's for sure. So that's pretty much it. I appreciate the conversation and the time, and I'll be around if you have any questions. But hopefully you had a good time with this conversation. And I don't work for Ionic, so don't think that I'm trying to like push it. But I love it so much that I can tell you that it does scale at a high level. So thank you.